Need your daily fix on mixed martial arts?
We're going to kind of recap Bellator 155.
From UFC 198.
Who's who?
Kind of a controversial decision.
And who's not?
I couldn't figure out why, and then it hit me.
Well, don't you fret, because Golden State Media Concepts got you covered. Get your daily dose of MMA podcast. Everything from the UFC, Bellator Fighting Championship, Extreme Cage Fighting, Invicta Fighting Championship, and so much more. Join us as we talk about some of the biggest names in mixed martial arts. We've got you covered here on Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC MMA podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Arnel De Leon, and I'm saying Happy Thanksgiving! Yay! Turkey everywhere, gravy, potatoes, people giving each other gifts, and people wearing strange, weird outfits, because you know that one weird uncle who's going to go embarrass everybody wearing that really strange outfit, and you want to go and top everyone, especially your cousins, with their weirdo outfit also. I don't know if that's just you, but, I don't know if it's you, but I do it. I do that every Thanksgiving. But I will say this, yes, this Thanksgiving has been quite strange. And it's not just me, but here in the LA County area, for those of you unaware, I reside in Los Angeles. And 2 days right before I went on to go celebrate Thanksgiving with my family who live up in Stockton, California, it was announced that 2 days right after Thanksgiving, it was going to be like this kind of re-closing, re-lockdown thing happening in LA. And it was done in order to prevent people from being able to travel. And I get it, okay? I understand that it is very dangerous for people to go come together here. But it's a family tradition for me and my entire family. It's a family tradition that I got to go and visit my family no matter what. And also they kept calling me over and over again. Be like, hey, when are you going to come here? Stop working. Leave Los Angeles. It sucks over there. Go to Stockton. Everything here is way more better. Even though it really isn't, but whatever. So I visited my family up in Stockton. And it was there I tried my best to go keep up with what was going on in the world. It was in Thanksgiving weekend. We saw Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr. So we got one fighter here coming off a 2-year layoff. And another fighter coming off a 15-year layoff. 15 years. We saw Nate Robinson, former 3-time NBA Slam Dunk champion, getting knocked out by a YouTuber, by some internet influencer, while he is wearing New York Knicks colors. Yikes. Then also we also had the main event, which was different for a UFC Fight Night event, which had Devin Clark versus Anthony Smith, to which Anthony Smith incredibly surprised me. It was surprisingly a very fun show, and I had very, very low expectations of that event, considering that 2 fights were called off. And also, I just am not the biggest fan of Anthony Smith. I understand people like the guy, but he really is not meant for me. But once again, I say Thanksgiving. I hope everyone had an awesome Thanksgiving. You had your turkey, you had potatoes, you had your strange stuffing, which doesn't go well for your turkey. But for today's podcast, things are going to be a wee bit different here. Now, in the end of the podcast, I might do a news brief if anything pops up. But for most of this podcast here, I'll be doing a Thanksgiving special review here, and it is for UFC 193. For those of you unaware, UFC 193, it took place on November 14, 2015, just a week right before Thanksgiving. We'll be looking at the UFC 5 years ago. What was going on at that time? What was happening back at UFC 193? And the strange thing, though, looking back at the show, it definitely is eye-opening how strange the landscape was just 5 years ago, because the main event of this show was Ronda Rousey versus Holly Holm. Yes, it was that fight. What has to be one of the most biggest, most instrumental, most important, game-changing nights in all of mixed martial arts happened the week right before Thanksgiving. And I'll tell you right now, as a person who remembers what happened after seeing the show and like watching the news and reading up what everyone else was saying about this, about the day or the week after the card, it definitely changed the landscape of mixed martial arts here, and changed the landscape of many of these fighters here. Rousey, Holly Holm, even when you look down the card here, even fighters like Stefan Struve, Uriah Hall, Robert Whittaker, this night really was an incredibly important night into pretty much riding the ship as to where the direction of the UFC it was going to go for the next 5 years here. Co-main event was Joanna Jędrzejczyk against Valeria Letourneau, and I think this has to be maybe the first card in UFC history to which the main event and the co-main event were both women's fights. And it was at this moment right here when Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who, by the way, spoiler alert, she won when she retained her women's strawweight belt. I thought to myself that Joanna Jędrzejczyk would be the next big thing here, but I digress here. I'll be talking about UFC 193, and let's get to it. First off, this show takes place in the huge Melbourne, Australia arena here. I'm trying to find so it's called Dockland Stadium, and Dockland Stadium has to have like one of the most impressive looking giant stadiums I've ever seen. In the sense that if you go to the stadium here, Dockland Stadium, and you compare it to like the majority of like UFC events, the atmosphere that Docklands has is so much bigger than any other MMA event out there. Like even for like at the MGM Grand, Madison Square Garden, in some other like casino or hotel in Las Vegas, I till now have not seen a giant arena as good looking as Dockland Stadium here. And the strange thing though is that, as I'm speaking right now, we're currently amidst, the whole Abu Dhabi thing. We got Fight Island. Fight Island doesn't look all that different. Like, if you told me right now, like, oh man, they're actually competing at the MGM or Staples Center, you wouldn't realize it. You really wouldn't. I remember MMA On Point said it best when they said that no matter what location the UFC goes to, every UFC event looks the same. And I gotta say, yeah, that is true here. It really is. And so, considering the fact that we are going through COVID right now, I've been watching a whole bunch of fights in empty arenas. It is amazing, and it is a complete spectacle, and I am way more appreciative of the crowd when they go watch to a live event, whether it be basketball, football, pro wrestling, MMA. At the time of this recording also, later this month, the NBA are going to start having their games, and they're going to allow people to go, and it's not going to be in a bubble. It's going to be people. It's going to be people coming to the Staples Center or to the Honda Center to go like watch their will the Honda Center be available? I don't know. It makes sense if they separate the Clippers and Lakers, Honda Center and Staples Center. That'd be a lot more better. But then again, I go back to it. I'm discussing UFC 183, and I absolutely love the Dockland Stadium here. And I'll be talking with a commentator here about the commentary has always been janky, but this here, especially with the crowd here, really opened my eyes on a lot of things. But let's go talk about the first fight of the night here. So, first fight of the night was Jared Rosholt against Stefan Skyscraper Struve. Yes. And here's the thing. Jared Rosholt, his nickname was The Big Show. And, yep, not that Big Show, but it was Jared Rosholt. Not the Big Show. He's just The Big Show. He may or may not literally be an actual show, but he is big. So he is fighting against Stefan Struve. Now then, before this fight starts though, we were brought in, so I have been desensitized already at this point with John Anik being as professional as he is whenever he does any MMA commentary. Because when you hear John Anik introduced to you to the show, he's like, UFC, fight night today, really exciting show here. And then we have Mike Goldberg who's like, UFC 193 is going to be the very best show in the world right now. Yeah! Like, here's the in the span of 20 seconds, just when the show starts, that guy is pretty much out of breath and he is gasping for air. And he starts sounding like Doc Rivers, the coach for the LA Clippers. Strange then. So, Mike Goldberg here, he's ecstatic. I'm happy seeing Joe Rogan and Mike Goldberg together once again. Although I'm looking at the past year, it's really good to see both of them together doing commentary. And so let's talk about Jared Rosholt versus Stefan Struve. Stefan Struve, to me, and throughout his entire career, has always been this guy. He's so tall. Look at him. He's huge. He should, emphasis on should, have an advantage over any person he faces. And the problem with Stefan Struve is that I love the guy. If you've ever played him in the UFC video games, like UFC 2 and 3, he's my main. And the dude being as huge as he is, a near 7-footer. Alright then, he's got lengthy arms. He looks like a Slenderman. Yeah, that's what it is. Like when he walks around, he looks like Slenderman. And got Jared Rosholt, who himself is a big dude. Like he walked around like 6'4", and he just was so much smaller than Stefan Struve here. And the commentary team are like, alright, here we go, Stefan Struve. Look at him. He's really big, ain't he? And Joe Rogan's like, ha 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 ha. Yeah, Stefan Struve, he is big. Look at the size difference. Look at it. Jamie, put up the size difference here and the graph of how big Stefan Struve is. And looking back at Stefan Struve, who is one of my personal favorites here, because if he ain't doing MMA fighting, if he ain't training, he's stuck at home cooking breakfast and lunch and dinner with his mom, and it's like the most sweetest thing you can ever put up. Go on YouTube, type up Stefan Struve cooking, and then me and your brother labeled this. We call this thing called Cooking with Struve. And it's Stefan Struve in his super small room, no bigger than my small apartment over here, and he's cooking with his mom. And his mom's like, how's your day going, Stefan? And Stefan's like, like a proper upset child in the late 90s who's like 16 years old wearing sunglasses. He's like, no, I will not tell you how my day is going, but thank you, mother, for cooking me breakfast. I'm appreciative of that. Now I'm going to go run and throw out the same 3-punch combination in the air as I am running for like 7 weeks consecutively. And I'm going to go back home and cook curry because I'm Stefan Struve and I'm big. Oh, man. So Stefan Struve, he's fighting against Jared Rosholt here, the big show. So Rosholt, I don't get why Stefan Struve is so easy to take down. All right, then. So how this fight pretty much went off was that Jared Rosholt had no respect, zero respect for Stefan Struve's reach. Because the problem with Stefan Struve was that he had such great reach, but like you weren't ever afraid of Stefan Struve like putting down heavy damage onto you despite his length. Yes, the guy can knock people out, but for the most part here, the dude's a point system fighter. Like Stefan Struve, he is the epitome of a frail whale. If you don't know the definition of frail whale is, it's just, you got this really big dude who, contrary to his size, doesn't carry his actual size to the point where it's like really domineering. So he's just big for the sake of being big. Like he reminds me of me when I played basketball. Like when I was like, middle school basketball. Where I was like, I'm this really big guy who like hovers over everybody, and I got a long reach, and I'm pretty darn athletic, because Stefan Struve is incredibly athletic. But even with the tools that you have, you don't really do anything with it. So it led to me becoming a really bad basketball player, where I'm only in the team because of how big I am, for how athletic I am, and how fundamentally sounded I am. But I myself will never go past a certain level. I reach a certain ceiling with what I'm capable of, and that is Stefan Struve in a nutshell. Where Joe Rogan, throughout all 3 rounds here, Rogan and Goldberg, Stefan Struve, he has so much potential. Look at his size. Look at his length. He should be impossible to take down. He should be always winning the stand-up here. And as he's saying this, like Jared Rosholt just like bum dives at Stefan Struve as if he owed him lunch money. Because all 3 rounds here was Jared Rosholt, it's just him like not caring about the reach of Struve and just getting in there for dirty boxing. And if he isn't getting the dirty boxing thing going on, he just dives in there, shoots in for a double leg or something like takedown, and slowly work on Struve. Now, I will say this round, Stefan Struve did a really good job for himself, trying to defend the takedown and not being that much damaged. But for as good as a fighter as Stefan Struve is defensively, he could never unload a level of offense that made it look like that his opponent should respect anything he does. Because tell you right now, Stefan Struve, he can tap you out. It's very unlikely he'll do it. He can grapple you. It's very unlikely he'll like do anything with his grappling. He can definitely jab you. And there are some fighters out there, i.e., I'm talking about like Robbie Lawler and Anthony Smith before this last fight here, where it's like they are perfectly fine taking jabs and just eating it though. I feel like Robbie Lawler and Tyron Woodley would be the perfect fighters that they'd be the perfect partners for Stefan Struve. Because Stefan Struve, he ain't gonna knock you out, and so he'll just like unload jabs on you, and Tyron Woodley and Robbie Lawler are just gonna go eat it, and then nothing's really gonna happen. I feel that. I really do. So Jared Rochelle was able to win the fight via unanimous decision here. There wasn't a single round to which it looked like Stefan Struve was ever at all winning. He did a good job defending himself. Congratulations. But defending himself is only half of the fight game here. He was able to land in some good jabs. Okay, good for you. But jabs don't win you fights most of the time. They don't. And Stefan Struve, even after this fight, he never developed that ability to truly finish people or to dominate people with his size. And so, coming up after the short break here, I'll be discussing the rest of UFC 193 Thanksgiving Special. See you soon.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Greetings and welcome back. And so I am discussing UFC 193 here. I, Arnel De Leon, is going to go look back 5 years ago. What was the landscape of UFC 5 years ago, you know, the week before Thanksgiving in 2015. And I'll tell you right now, things are very different here. I just discussed Stefan Struve versus Jared Rosholt. Stefan Struve came into the octagon being like, this guy has so much potential. And he had all the tools. He really did. Stefan Struve was somebody that the UFC really wanted to push, and they kept putting him over and over again in marquee fights, and in big cards, and in pay-per-views. Stefan Struve was one of the fighters, for the longest time, he was a journeyman fighter who was always just outside like the top 7 in the heavyweight rankings. He always was. And the heavyweight rankings every single year always changes. Like you're gonna see like 5-6 fighters whose name are popping in and out all the time. Like, one year we have Shane Carney, because in this show, when they were talking about the heavyweights, they immediately brought up Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos. Like, these are the guys, these are the stars of the heavyweight division. Cut 5 years later, Cain Velasquez, he's off wrestling Brock Lesnar in a different country in a pro wrestling fight. And also him going to AAA, doing luchador wrestling moves. And then we have Junior Dos Santos here, who at one point was considered the best pound-for-pound striker in the entire world. And now the dude's pretty much a journeyman, and he might go fight against John Jones. Strange role we're living in. But whatever. Stefan Struve was somebody I always wanted to see succeed, and it's set to know that he never really reached his full potential here. And when you look at this entire card here, we have some fighters who ultimately reached their potential and some who didn't here. And the next fight here was Uriah Hall versus Robert Whittaker. So going into this fight here, Uriah Hall was a favorite. And I remember here, me, my brother, and my sister, we were huge Uriah Hall fans. We thought this guy had it. Like when we played the UFC video games, we picked Uriah Hall because he had all the coolest looking moves. And one thing that absolutely blows my mind now, looking at it now, would be the fact that in the year of 2015, he fought 5 times. He fought 5 times in the year of 2015, and in this fight, within the span of, I think it was 78 or 98 days, this would be his 3rd fight. Which is insane. You know what? Uriah Hall, where he is positioned right now, because Uriah Hall and Robert Whittaker, where they are right now, is very similar to like Khamzat Chimaev, and it was supposed to happen against Leon Edwards. And you got Leon Edwards here. You got this proper journeyman fighter, this real veteran who is at the cusp of getting a title fight, but he's always being pushed aside here because Robert Whittaker at one point was not really seen all that much as a highlight reel fighter. It really wasn't. Even though at a young age, Robert Whittaker is still fairly, really young, but he was always seen as like the gatekeeper, as the guy he kind of is now, where he's the guy who defeats the flashy fighter, or the flashy fighter has to go defeat him in order to go and fight the middleweight belt. There was a lot of talks going on, like, oh man, dream match, Uriah Hall, Anderson Silva, this is going to be awesome and amazing. Talk about, a dream fight of styles, an exciting fight. Now, we did get Uriah Hall and Anderson Silva happening, but people thought it would be Uriah Hall and Anderson Silva fighting for the middleweight belt years ago. But it never really turned out that well. Instead, we got Uriah Hall here. Uriah Hall, just like Khamzat Chimaev, is constantly fighting, and he's being placed really far ahead in the cards here. He shouldn't be... Uriah Hall was pushed way too soon. He was. He was pushed off the basis that he was an exciting fighter, but he never developed that all-around skill set. And even now, in 2020, he never developed that grappling skill set or learn how to fight against fighters in close quarters or handle the poking game all that well. Uriah Hall has lost 3 fights since then. I know, good for him. He's only lost 3 fights in the past 5 years after this fight. Okay, that's good for Uriah Hall, but there is so much stock placed on Uriah Hall. So, going to this fight here, now knowing that Uriah Hall never ended up being the fighter that many thought he would, even in this fight against Anderson Silva, the commentary team were bashing Uriah Hall, specifically Michael Bisping. Bisping was like, Uriah Hall fighting against Anderson Silva, this would have been a dream match years ago, but sadly Uriah Hall never became the fighter we want him to become. But you know what? He's still a good fighter. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, talk about burying Uriah Hall. And then when he defeated Anderson Silva, the focus was on Silva, and it was not on Uriah Hall, because it was Silva's last fight. So Hall right now, he is in a weird position, and I absolutely would not be surprised if Uriah Hall ends up taking his talents to Bellator, or to ONE, or to some other organization, because Uriah Hall, where he is right now in the UFC, is pretty much placed in the journeyman, gatekeeper role here. Meanwhile, we have Robert Whittaker, who is a journeyman gatekeeper, who is now expected to fight against Israel Adesanya in a rematch for the middleweight belt 5 years later. Robert Whittaker, his stock was low, he aimed really high and he got it. Uriah Hall, his stock was super high, but he really didn't hit the mark that a lot of people expect him to reach. So Whittaker, Uriah Hall here. So Whittaker, dude, this fight was a proper scrap fight here, in the sense that it really was a fighting game here, where you got Uriah Hall trying to bust out like spinning elbows and spinning kicks, while Robert Whittaker is like, nope, no kicking, just 1-2, square triangle, gonna go shoot him for haymaker. He's holding that proper L1 R1 button here, and this was definitely a dominant performance here, in the sense that the only thing Uriah Hall is really good at is his striking ability, but he has a tendency of struggling to the poking game, to the grind-up games, because Uriah Hall, up to this point, was known as the guy who can go and either knock people out or have these insane wars where he's putting himself in a bad position where he could potentially lose. Uriah Hall, before this fight, fought against Gegard Mousasi, where he was able to knock him out. I think it was like a knee? I think it was like a flying knee. And so, I'm looking at this now, and yeah, it is. So it was a flying knee by Uriah Hall. He was able to knock out Mousasi, and back in 2015, Mousasi, oh my goodness, you could say this guy, Mousasi, was a top four fighter in the UFC. So what he was able to do was, because Uriah Hall has a reluctancy of trying to compete and fight in 50-50 exchanges, and when I say 50-50 exchanges, I mean when there's a scenario where 2 fighters are simultaneously trying to slug at each other, like who would most likely win. And in this scenario here, it'd be Whittaker. Because Whittaker is one of those fighters who, his fighting style is very reckless, but at the same time, when he needs to defend himself and be able to bob and weave and move and avoid damage, he can definitely do it though. Uriah Hall is he's got plus 10 on his offensive stats, but his defensive stats are kind of jank and weak, and he just can't bob and weave and dodge and he's eating all the shots that Whittaker can give to him. Meanwhile, Whittaker, he's sidestepping, he's moving around, he's ducking over, he's grappling with him. He's putting all the pressure on Uriah Hall, and this is just a complete wash of how skilled Whittaker is and how much we undervalued how good of a fighter Whittaker was 5 years ago. And so for the next fight, we got Mark Hunt versus Antonio Bigfoot Silva. So this fight is a rematch from the 2013 bout, to which it was a draw, and looking back at that fight, it was a proper war. Alright then, we got two big, battered up, like bloody dudes going all at it, and it was very unlikely that we would see, it was very unlikely we're going to see either dude get knocked out, since we got two dudes who got iron shins here. So covering this fight, I guess, with Mark Hunt and Antonio Silva, when I first saw this, I thought it was definitely going to be another draw or a split decision victory, but instead, it was Mark Hunt knocking at Antonio Silva just 3 minutes and 41 seconds into the first round with a one-punch knockout, with a one-punch right overhand grazing knockout punch onto Antonio Silva. And this fight here was the perfect fight. Here's the thing I like about UFC 183 here, was that when you look at the card now in hindsight, the way it was laid out from beginning to end was really well. I mean, the first fight was a slop-fest heavyweight bout. The second fight, we got this really high-level technical bout between Whittaker and Uriah Hall. Then we got the bout between two dudes doing rock'em sock'em robots. And the final two fights were just stellar. So for Hunt versus Antonio Silva here, it was sad that both these fighters never really got that title fight, though, because when you watch this fight and you hear Rogan and Mike Goldberg, they're like, both Hunt and Antonio Silva, there may be just one or two fights away from possibly fighting against Cain Velasquez or Junior Dos Santos. Now, obviously, it didn't turn out like that. And then it goes on, we end up having the long, very long, sort of one-way rivalry dispute thing happening between Mark Hunt and the UFC. We got lawsuits going off the left and right here. Even now, I'm still unsure of what exactly is going on here, involving Brock Lesnar and stuff. But Mark Hunt, man, Mark Hunt is such a big question mark for me. Like, him and Derek Lewis are the two big question marks, in the sense that these are two fighters who would definitely be awesome in the 90s of mixed martial arts. And it's insane that both of them, even now, Mark Hunt I think is still active still. They're both now, in 2020, are still active fighters. And they fight such a meathead fighting style. They're both just better versions. They're both what Tank Abbott's was supposed to be when he was in the UFC. And then you get this big, brawly heavyweight guy, not all that skilled, but he hits like a tank. Alright? And so Mark Hunt, his accuracy is just dead on amazing. While Derek Lewis, also the same thing. He developed this strange grappling game, which makes him relevant. And so for Mark Hunt and Derek Lewis, those are two fighters that I am shocked and I'm astounded that because the talent pool that was in 2015 versus 2020 right now, night and day, man. Complete night and day. The 2020 talent pool we have currently right now is so much better, especially in the women's side. One could say right now that the women's division right now is the absolute best it's ever been in years. The heavyweight division is... So, some people might say the heavyweight division is kind of weird right now, with Daniel Cormier gone, and people expect John Jones to go compete at heavyweight. And then you got like Jazarna Rosenstrike, Curtis Blades, and then Alistair Overeem. You got guys out there who aren't necessarily going to be the dudes who will win the belt and maintain that belt for a long stretch of time. It's very unlikely. I just can't see Rosenstrike or Curtis Blades, or especially Ngannou or JDS or even Alexander Akish to be the guys who will hold that belt. I expect Miocic, Ngannou, and John Jones. If John Jones were to go win the belt, I expect those guys to go in the long run be the guys in the heavyweight division. Alexander Gustafsson right now, he seemed like he would be great for heavyweights. In his performance against Verdum, he did really well for himself. It just Verdum came to that fight in really good shape, and he just did better than Gustafsson in that fight. Antonio Silva, right after this fight, continued to go on a pretty bad losing streak, or a series of losses, big time. So here's the strange thing about Antonio Silva. From 2013 to 2017, this 4-year span, he ended up losing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Within the span of 4 years, he lost 8 fights. But he won 1 fight against Swapalade in UFC 190. But for the most part here, dang. And here's the strange part. Bigfoot Silva, he fought against, before Mark Hunt, he lost to Cain Velasquez. And in 2013, Cain Velasquez was seen by many as the best heavyweight of all time. And before that, he defeated Alistair Overeem back in 2012. So there's so many good things going his way. He defeated Fedor Emelianenko. He lost to Cormier, and he also lost to Cain Velasquez. He ended up losing to Cain Velasquez twice. And Travis Brown back in 2012, when Brown was a real big deal. And then, it just, sadly, Antonio Silva, by the time he fought against Mark Hunt in this bout here, it was at this point, it was like, okay, so we are not seeing the best version of either fighters here. We really are not. Mark Hunt, he ended up fighting against Brock Lesnar in a whatever fight, to be perfectly honest with you. It was a fight that he really wasn't meant to win. And Antonio Silva continued to go and have losses here, have a continued string of losses, and ended up retiring in 2017. So Antonio Silva and Mark Hunt, from this fight here, yes, they were exciting fighters. It's sad to see these fighters like those two and Uriah Hall and Stefan Struve be the fighters that the UFC were very, very high on. They're going to be the guys who are going to be in marquee main event matches. Sadly, it didn't turn out like that. And you know what? While their doors closed, 2 fighters' doors opened and 2 more doors closed. I'll be talking about the 2 women's bouts here, which is Joanna Jędrzejczyk against Valerie Letourneau and Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey, coming up after the short break here. See you soon.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play. This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
And we are back. I'm discussing UFC 193 to celebrate Thanksgiving for you guys, because UFC 193 took place 1 week right before Thanksgiving, and it was a very huge night for multiple people's careers in this card. And so I'll be discussing the co-main event here. First, we got Joanna Jędrzejczyk against Valerie Letourneau, and Joanna Jędrzejczyk has to be one of my favorite fighters of all time, and is a guaranteed UFC Hall of Famer. And I'll say this right now. During her time as champion, I'll say this, she had a better run as a champion, more so than Ronda Rousey. Yeah, I'll say that right now. Because I still remember, I think it was last year, where people saying, hey, who are the best women's fighters, who are the best UFC fighters or MMA fighters in the past decade? And they threw out Amanda Nunes, they said Holly Holm, they said Chris Cyborg, they say Ronda Rousey, they even said Miesha Tate. But for some reason, Joanna Jędrzejczyk's name wasn't there. They're saying, oh, who are the best female fighters in the past 10 years? And Joanna Jędrzejczyk wasn't in the discussion. And I was so shocked by that. Because if you think about it, Ronda Rousey, her time period, her big period of her being a mega superstar was about maybe, I say, at most 3 years. Okay, let me look right now. So she came into the... Okay, so I'll tell you this right now. Even though she was a big star in Strikeforce, she never really excelled and became the major star she was up until UFC 168 when she defeated Miesha Tate, and that was in 2013. And then right afterwards, she ended up losing to Holly Holm in November 15 of 2015. Okay, so it was 2 years. So she was only at the top for 2 years. And although those 2 years were incredibly big, I just find it astounding that Joanna Jędrzejczyk, who was already a dominant champion at this point already in 2015, then in 2020 had a fight of the year against Zhang Weili, 2 stellar fights against Rose Namajunas, and there's nothing holding back Joanna Jędrzejczyk right now. She can continue fighting for another 3 or 4 years and have match of the year contenders. With fighters like Jessica Andrade, Rose Namajunas, and Zhang Weili, and Yan Xiaonan, who's making her way right now up in the rankings. And if what I believe is true right now, I do believe that there will be a period in time where the UFC is going to make the extra efforts into trying to go get the atom weights or the strawweights from one championship. And also, they're trying to go and make an atom division right now for the UFC. Dana White was talking about wanting to have an atom division, but then that got that ended up being stunted as a result of COVID-19. But Joanna Jędrzejczyk, she's a big strawweight. She is. She can easily go and compete at bantamweight if she actually wants to, or at flyweight. But Joanna Jędrzejczyk, she competes amazing at strawweight, and she's always bigger than a lot of her opponents. And you can reasonably see Joanna Jędrzejczyk ending up competing at atomweight. And if she competed at atomweight, she'd go murk people. So Joanna Jędrzejczyk, she, always to me, is one of the all-time greats ever in MMA, in UFC, in women's mixed martial arts. And it's very upsetting to me that in this card here, she's in the same card as Holly Holm. And even when Joanna Jędrzejczyk, she defeated Valerie Latona here, her boxing ability is out of this world. And it took 2 years? Yeah, it took 2-3 years afterwards, up until women fighters started developing and becoming a lot more better. That's when the Rose Namajunas and Zhang Weili started coming in. So Joanna Jędrzejczyk, she ended up defeating Valerie Latona here in this incredibly impressive, like, the kickboxing and, like, ability to poke fighters. The ability to poke is stellar. I say Dominic Cruz and Joanna Jędrzejczyk, in my opinion, have to be the 2 most fun and unique fighters to watch in terms of, like, the small fighters here. Because nobody fights like Joanna, and nobody fights like Dominic Cruz. Their ability to move inside and outside the pocket and poke their opponents with their leg kicks, with the body kicks, with very quick jabs, and with her speed. I don't believe there is a female fighter out there who is as accomplished as Joanna Jędrzejczyk in the strawweight division. I would say right now, she is the GOAT, as of right now, as I'm speaking, she is currently the GOAT of the women's strawweight division, and I would place her ahead of Ronda Rousey in terms of, like, overall greatness, off the basis of her actual success during her time as champion. And even during her time as not a champion, she had a stellar fight against Valentina Shevchenko, and she had a really underratedly good performance against Michelle Waterson. So Joanna Jędrzejczyk, she should be placed in the higher totem pole. Now, I don't have hindsight here. Maybe 20 years down the line, it would be like, yeah, Joanna Jędrzejczyk, she's actually better than Ronda Rousey here. But Ronda Rousey, in her 2-year period, can't believe that, Ronda Rousey, in her 2 years in the UFC, it meant so much for the organization that it's going to be a topic of, okay, what matters more? It's kind of like Conor McGregor and Khabib, or Conor McGregor and, like, who's, I guess, okay, and Kamaru Usman. All right, then. So, Conor McGregor never defended his belts. He never did. In history, he'll be seen as like a 2-time champion, as a double champion, but he has never successfully defended any of his belts. Kamaru Usman can go on a Demetrius Johnson level of title defenses. Just defending and murking everybody for years. And even then, you'll still be like, well, is it hard? Can you say Kamaru Usman is, greater than Conor McGregor, considering Conor McGregor brought in so much, money into the organization and a lot of eyes? So it becomes a matter of, do you judge a person based on their popularity, or their popularity and impact to the sports, or are you judging it based on their accomplishments and accolades in the sports? And Uriah Jacek, just like Kamaru Usman, I believe years down the line will be seen as that great fighter who, although didn't pull in a large crowd and wasn't the star, the megastar that a lot of people would have preferred others. Like I say, people would have preferred seeing Paige Van Zandt being the megastar. All right, then if you ask Dana White or anybody in the UFC brass who they would want to be the one carrying the women's strike belt for the next 5-7 years, you'd be like, most of them would say Paige Van Zandt. Even someone like Rachel Ostovich would be something that they would really want to push. But you know what? It's not pro wrestling. That's not how it really works here. So, Uriah Jacek, I think I saw like a random Instagram post where she's like, I don't plan to retire anytime soon. Because Uriah Jacek, she went in a huge like mental disarray after her loss to Willie Zhang. But now, she seems all good. Currently right now, things are going well for Valentina Shevchenko. It doesn't seem like her title reign is going to end anytime soon right now. So, right now, the women's divisions are very healthy. They really are. And they're in a very different place from what they were 5 years ago. So Uriah Jacek and Valerie Turner, Valerie, I don't know if she's still actively participating in the... so Bellator. So, Valerie, she ended up losing to Uriah Jacek, then lost to Johan Calderwood. Johan Calderwood is a fighter who deserves more. She ended up losing to Viviane Pereira, then went on a 2-fight win streak in Bellator, but then lost against Ilma McFarlane. McFarlane, a stellar fighter who I can easily see competing in the UFC one day. So Valerie right now, there's no rumor out there or speculation that she was going to retire soon. She's 37 years old. So you could see maybe 2 years left of Valerie here. Valerie coming into her fight against Uriah Jacek was 8-3. So there's a lot of hype going behind it. And so I respect Valerie Letourneau. I respect that she had, even though the judges' scorecards made it so that it's a unanimous decision victory here for Uriah Jacek, which it was. It really was. Joanna won every single round. It was a proper tough fight. It wasn't an easy going. Joanna obviously won the fight, but it wasn't like, oh man, she completely dominated and murked Valerie. No, it really wasn't. It really wasn't. Uriah Jacek just did just enough for her to stun Valerie's striking ability and her Muay Thai ability. Joanna's Muay Thai ability is incredibly underrated, and I'm excited for whoever Uriah Jacek is going to fight later. And you know what? So Valerie, she ended up losing a title fight in Bellator. Maybe she can get one later down the line. Who knows? And so, let's talk about the main event here. Alright then, for your main events, we got Ronda Rousey defending the women's Bantamweight title, the star, the rock star, versus Holly Holm. Ronda Rousey was the minus 1,200 favorites in this fight. And this, oh man, dude. So it was incredibly upsetting to hear the commentary team here, because it was obvious. I was like, Joe Rogan was the only person here who was actually promoting Holly Holm, because in the promotion package, it was, I think Mike Goldberg said it best, where he's like, Ronda Rousey, she's such a star, she's always working, like right now, she's actually working. I just found just a weird line here, that, oh man, she's such a great worker because she's working right now. Look at her, she's working. Yeah, look at her. And all the and all, like, you know, when they do the cinematic like promo packages, it's always, you see the fighters in a shadowy dark gym alone that's very poorly lit. This happens for a lot of John Jones ones. And for Ronda Rousey, it's just her like being swarmed by fans and her like appearing on talk shows and giving the big thumbs up and posing for camera. Meanwhile, Holly Holm here, she's seen as like the gritty fighter who's like traveling and jogging on the mountains, doing hikes and like doing cartwheels and stuff. So Ronda Rousey, I don't know, maybe it was intended like this, but they made Ronda Rousey come across as super unlikable in the show. Incredibly unlikable. She was going on full-on heel territory where you just wanted Ronda Rousey to lose. And it was very understandable as to why there was a lot of resentment coming in from the MMA community to Ronda Rousey, and why right now there seems to be this cringe aspect or this level of embarrassment when they say that, oh man, Ronda Rousey might be going back to MMA, and every MMA fan is going to be like, really? I don't want to see her. So Ronda Rousey right now, she is... Okay, so spoiler here, she ended up getting her head kicked in, but Ronda Rousey, when she lost the fights to Holly Holm here, it definitely was about that made her career change after this, by the way. Like, there were so many things going towards Ronda Rousey's life. She's getting commercials, she's getting endorsement deals. She was in the movie with Jean-Claude Van Damme. Jean-Claude Van Damme also, was it Expendables? Yeah, it was Expendables, yeah. Which Ronda Rousey was like kicking everybody's butt and was like doing like flying arm bars and head scissors on people. But Ronda Rousey here, when she fought against Holly Holm, she really was seen as the absolute favorite in this fight. She's like, oh man, she's unstoppable. And Mike Goldberg was pretty much given like the brand rights by Joe Rogan in this fight. Because no matter what Holly Holm did, no matter what she did, kept laying really these good, clean counter strikes onto Ronda Rousey. Mike Goldberg all the time was like, look at Ronda Rousey. She's a huge superstar, ain't she? Dang. She always comes up when the lights turn on. She's so popular. She's so famous. Everybody in the world loves Ronda Rousey. And Joe Rogan, being sick and tired of it, kind of like me and the rest of the audience, was like, can you please stop talking about how popular Ronda Rousey is, and let's talk about Ronda Rousey the fighter here. Ronda Rousey the fighter is doing really poor right now against Holly Holm. And when it came to this fight here, like, when I saw that Ronda Rousey got knocked out by Holly Holm here, I didn't see this live. I saw the replays of it, Sally. When Ronda Rousey ended him getting knocked out by Holly Holm, I was absolutely not surprised by this happening. It just didn't, though. And it's because my friends were complaining about it. I was like, oh man, Ronda Rousey, she's always defeating all her opponents in like under 40 seconds. What the heck? It's boring. It's not fun. But I know, here's the thing. The women's bantamweight division at the time kind of like was like the women's featherweight division, where it was full of like no-name fighters, or the win-loss records for the fighters in the bantamweight division isn't all that in-depth. Like, most of the fighters here were really being focused, like Claudia Cadella and Carla Esparza and like Michelle Watterson and Paige Van Zandt, they were being focused and dialed in specifically in the women's strike division. So while the women's strike division, while that division was being stacked, the women's bantamweight division, though, it got left over, which led to really Holly Holm, Miesha Tate, and Ronda Rousey being the only big major stars in that division. Now, obviously, Amanda Nunes, she's right around the corner here, but by this point here, Amanda Nunes' stock wasn't all that high for you to be like really high. Like, oh man, Amanda Nunes, she's going to be a big deal here. Now, obviously, she ended up being a big deal, but that's only with the power of hindsight. So Ronda Rousey, during this time as women's bantamweight champion, she came across as heelish, and when I saw the replays in the news that she ended up getting knocked out by Holly Holm, I was not surprised, because at some point, that division is going to develop, kind of like the men's flight division, where it was like Demetrius Johnson and everybody else, maybe John Dodson, maybe him, and then over time, there's this idea that the flight division might have been scrapped. Thank goodness Henry Cejudo, he became champion. Thank goodness for TJ Dillashaw versus Henry Cejudo and Dominic Cruz stepping in, and Davison Figueiredo. Without those fighters, the men's fight division might be gone. It might have. And so, coming back after a short break here, I'll continue to discuss the UFC 193 show for our Thanksgiving special here, and then go on to the news brief right here at the GSMC MMA podcast.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
And we are back, continuing in with my review of UFC 193. I'm discussing Holly Holm and Ronda Rousey here, and this fight, it was very strange, because Ronda Rousey here, it's tough to look back at Ronda Rousey fights and not think, alright then, is Ronda Rousey as good of a striker as we think she is, or did she just end up fighting fighters who weren't that good in striking? Was she fighting, which is totally not true, by the way. She fought against really good top talent in the early days of women's bantamweight. Is currently right now, the current iteration of the women's bantamweight division right now is a lot more better. But we're thinking about Ronda Rousey here. Was she as good as we thought she was? And Max Kellerman said it best, where it was, Ronda Rousey is far, far far from the best MMA fighter out there in the world. She's far from it, though. But she's important. And you could think about that the same way we could think of, like, someone like BJ Penn, Chuck Liddell. Because I always use Demetrius Johnson as my example here. Because Demetrius Johnson, in theory, should be the most accomplished UFC fighter of all time. He should be. He currently has a record for most title defenses and has had the most dominant run as a UFC champion. Like, you can talk about Khabib, but Khabib defended his belt, I think 4 times only. And so for Demetrius Johnson, him having the accolade for having the most title defenses ever in UFC history, can you say that Demetrius Johnson is greater than Ronda Rousey here? And when Max Kellerman said that Ronda Rousey is far from the best MMA fighter out there in the world, she is important and safe to respect that. Okay. So, we have to accept the idea that Ronda Rousey was the women's bantamweight champion, but she wasn't that good. And when we think about that now, it's very strange. Like that Joe Rogan hype train especially, where it was like Ronda Rousey could defeat the heavyweights. Like you could see Ronda Rousey fight against Cain Velasquez, or you could see Ronda Rousey knock out Floyd Mayweather or Mike Tyson. I'm not saying it can't happen, but the possibility, the potential of it actually happening is very, very low. So for Ronda Rousey here, reviewing her time as champion here, because I still remember Ronda Rousey was super big. You can never go anywhere. I remember kids in the school park here, because I was still in high school at the time, during Ronda Rousey's time as champion, and people were saying, Ronda Rousey, she's so big. She's a huge superstar, man. Everyone knows Ronda Rousey. And this is when she was also appearing as The Rock in WrestleMania, doing like arm drags and like judo tosses on Triple H in WrestleMania. It was weird. But Ronda Rousey here, I will always say she is an important figure in the world of mixed martial arts. I just don't want to see her appear in an MMA octagon again. Now, there has been discussions about whether or not Ronda Rousey is still viably good enough to compete amongst the top 5. I remember in I talked about this, where there's a post discussing what are some things you don't enjoy about mixed martial arts. And then someone brought up they don't enjoy women's mixed martial arts because Ronda Rousey made it so that every other woman looked bad. And then when she ended up getting knocked out, and then you look back at her old fights, you realize that Ronda Rousey wasn't that special of a fighter. So people really, for as many eyes that Ronda Rousey brought into the product, she also turned away a lot of people, though, surprisingly enough. And although Ronda Rousey, she got my sister into mixed martial arts. She got into people who shouldn't be fans of mixed martial arts. There's a video going out there where a mom was a huge Ronda Rousey fan, and so she decided to go to an octagon and fight against an amateur fighter, and then she ended up getting knocked out with like one punch, and it was absolutely awful. And no, like here's the thing, I watch mixed martial arts every single day. Alright? Every day. I watch MMA stuff. Every day I watch basketball. Doesn't mean I should go out there, hold a basketball, and be like, I am now good enough to play against LeBron James or to compete in the National Basketball Association. No. That's not how it works. Okay, then? For as much as I would love to go to, play for the Los Angeles Lakers, it ain't happening unless, for some reason, those weird aliens from the Space Jam movie comes in and they go and give me this magical ball and I become like the best player in the entire world. But that's the only thing that can go make me a better basketball player and make me good enough to compete in the NBA at my age. Alright then. Other than that, very unlikely of it actually happening. And for Ronda Rousey though, she inspired a lot of fighters. Like she inspired like Kay Hansen to become an MMA fighter, and she is a top prospect that people have to look out for right now in the women's fight division. There are a lot of fighters who, for instance, 2 of the top fighters right now in one championship, both of them, they are inspired to become fighters based on Ronda Rousey's performances during her time as champion. So, yeah, Ronda Rousey, I respect what she's done in the sport. I don't want to see her back in the octagon again. I don't want to see Chuck Liddell back in the octagon. I don't want to see BJ Penn back in the octagon. And I don't want to see Ronda Rousey. But for Holly Holm ended up getting murked by, sadly enough, Miesha Tate. Holly Holm really was given the rocket ship the jetpack to go and fly over and become the star. It just sadly did not happen. She ended up losing to Miesha Tate in a... It's the thing. Ronda Rousey, she was a better matchup for Tate, but Holly Holm just wasn't a good matchup for Tate. Tate was able to utilize her grappling ability here. Because the difference between Holly Holm and Amanda Nunes ended up being the one to go defeat Miesha Tate to become the women's bantamweight champion. The difference between Holm and Amanda Nunes was that Nunes had the all-around game, and even now, she's developing more of the all-around game. She's now a grappler for the most part. Amanda Nunes, she's known as a striker, but if you look at her past recent fights, she's now more so a grappler. And for Holly Holm, she never really transitioned into being that all-around MMA fighter that if she were to develop... When Holly Holm fought against Ronda Rousey, she was 34 years old. She was 34, and so her overall potential ceiling wasn't all that high. But her floor was good enough to defeat Ronda Rousey, but her ceiling was low. Which backfired on her. It's currently right now, I think she's... she's 34. Was she 34 like 33 at the time of this fight? But Holly Holm was no like young spring chicken coming. Okay, so she's currently 39. So she was 34 at the time of defeating Ronda Rousey, and by that point already, she pretty much was already considering retirement. Like even now, there are rumors circulating on whether or not Holly Holm should retire. There's people speculating on whether or not it is right or wrong for Holly Holm to continue like covering over the division. Even though, if you think about it, really, her presence isn't healthy for the division. It really isn't, though. It would be great if the UFC can have like new stars. Like Arnel De Leon is somebody who could easily be a big star for the UFC, but then she ended up losing. Raquel Pennington and Holly Holm, they ended up having their battle. Raquel Pennington was always somebody that's so much potential, but she was never able to like put it all together. Good thing Miguel Anderson was able to defeat Holly Holm here, and I feel upset knowing that. I am upset knowing that I'm happy when Holly Holm loses fights here, but at this point right now, I'm currently the type of fan who doesn't like it when they see older fighters take over. Older fighters defeat these young fighters here, and then those young fighters struggle, making a comeback here. Because if they ended up, it's kind of like Sean O'Malley. If Sean O'Malley were to win his last fight against Marlon Vera, things would be very different enough for the trajectory of Sean O'Malley. And if Sean O'Malley were to lose again, all the momentum O'Malley has gained in the past like 2 years would be all for nothing. It'd be all for nothing, and it would be like a Paige Van Zandt scenario where you got the star here who sadly was pushed way too much, or ended up losing to these veterans who are objectively better than her. I guess it's like the exact opposites of MVP. Of MVP from Bellator. You got this guy here who's really famous, really popular, great striker, but he's always placed in these like tune-up jobber fights. Because the second he fights against somebody who's really good, like Douglas Lima, they end up getting embarrassed. So, Holly Holm, I don't know what the future of her is. According to her, she said that she believes that she is like right there. She's at the cusp of getting another title fight. Do I believe Holly Holm should get another title fight? No. The only way I would ever see Holly Holm potentially become a title contender again would be if Amanda Nunes were to retire. But other than that, though, I don't reasonably see Holly Holm grabbing the belt anytime soon, though. I like to see Holly Holm in the feather division. I think that would be a really good idea. Have Holly Holm go in, become the queen of the women's feather division, and keep that division going, because for the most part here, that division is pretty much dead. And so that brings us to a close for the Thanksgiving special for UFC 193. It was definitely an eye-opening event. It was a strange event where the landscape of that event, where the fighters were placed on what people wanted to see in that card, what they're expecting to see in the future, this didn't pan out happening. And obviously, the knockout heard around the world of Holly Holm knocking out Ronda Rousey was definitely a game changer there. And one of the side effects of that knockout was that because of that, Ronda Rousey became kind of a background piece. It then became the Conor McGregor show, and Conor McGregor was now, he was in the spotlight. He became the spotlight guy right now. And right now, when I look at the current the current land of the UFC right now, the current land of the world UFC right now, I say right now, it has to be Israel Adesanya. Like, Israel Adesanya has the most momentum coming in, more so than any other fighter. Colby Covington was there at one point. Jorge Masvidal, up until he fought against Kamaru Usman, was at that point there. But Israel Adesanya, his stock is all the way high. He's bringing in more than anybody else in the UFC. There's nobody who connects to the current day and age of the everyday young Joe from ages like 18 to 34 than Israel Adesanya. Some people find it cringy, some people find it awkward, some people find it childish. But Israel Adesanya, what he's into with his whole anime, his appeal to geek culture, with the way how he talks, with the way how he presents himself, he perfectly encapsulates that 18 to 34 demographic that the UFC have a tendency of struggling to get. I think I randomly found a article out there where it was talking about, it was giving up the stats on the demographics for each sport, and basketball is a sport that has the youngest audience. And you compare it to the UFC, and I talked with one of my friends about this, and they said that the UFC seems like it's a show that's specifically appealing to dads who are like in their 40s or late 30s or 50s. Nothing about the UFC show actually ever appeals to someone who's 18 to 34. But Israel Adesanya, he's doing it though. He's bringing people into the product, and I'm happy to say that if Israel Adesanya continues doing what he's doing, Izzy could be really the next big major star in the UFC. He's a great talker. He's got a good look. He's got a fun fighting style. Although his fight against Romero was no bueno, his ceiling of potential is really great. And I do believe that if things go right, Adesanya can be as big of a star as Ronda Rousey or Conor McGregor. And so right before I end today's podcast, let me give you a quick preview of the upcoming UFC Fight Night event coming up this Saturday. And the time of this recording is UFC Fight Night Hermansson versus Vettori. We got Jack Hermansson versus Marvin Vettori. We got Ovince St. Preux against Jamal Hill. Montana Del Rosa against Talia Santos. Roman Dolce against John Allen. And Nate Lador against Movsar Evzalov. They'll be coming in the main card here. But in the prelims, yes, I know not everybody enjoys watching the prelims here, but we got some fun matchups here. We got Gian Vellante against Jake Collier, Jimmy Flick against Cody Durden, Jordan Levitt against Matt Weeman, and a fun one for me, we got Luis Smolka versus Jose Quinones. Those two fighters could pull off the best fight of the night. It could actually happen here. That's going to be coming up this Saturday, and then the week right after that, we've got UFC 256. Davison Figueiredo and Brandon Moreno, they'll be fighting, even though they just fought less than 3 weeks ago. Can't believe it. And then we got Tony Ferguson against Charles Oliveira, a battle of twins. We got the Spider-Man meme thing popping up where they're pointing at each other. Renato Moicano against Rafael Facias, Kevin Holland against Jacare Souza, and JDS Junior Dos Santos against Cyril Gane. And also in the prelims here, we got Andrea Lee versus Jillian Robertson. This is a fight that both women have to win. Alright, because I'll tell you right now, if either of them lose, considering on what's happening right now with the Dynamite Contender Series, where they're constantly bringing in new fighters, one of them has to win. This is a must-win for either of these women here. And forgot. Also, in the prelims, we also got Gavin Tucker against Billy Quarantillo. Dang, Billy Quarantillo. If you haven't seen his fights, you should. He's a really fun guy. And so that brings us to a close for today's podcast. You have been a great, great audience. Happy Thanksgiving. And all I gotta say is thank you. Thank you for listening to the GSMC MMA podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts MMA Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.